Welcome, one and all, to the Stock Up Podcast, your one-stop shop for stocking up on the information you need to qualify for the Pro Tour. My name is Alex Midas. I am joined each and every week by my co-host, Jacob Negro, where we talk about everything related to competitive Magic and how you can qualify for the Pro Tour. If you'd like to support us, the best way to do so is over on patreon.com/stockuppodcast. At the moment, we have one tier that's $1 a month, and for that, you get access to all of our exclusive content. For all of our patrons who have supported us thus far, on behalf of Jacob and I would like to thank you very much. And if you'd like to follow us also over on YouTube, that would be much appreciated. Of course, you can also listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. So thanks for listening, and please enjoy the rest of the podcast. So, Jacob, how have you been enjoying New Standard and how the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle set has shaken things up?
It's been nice. I've been paying attention to Standard a little bit. There was two events I kind of followed last weekend, the Spotlight Series and the European Regional Championship, so those are cool to watch. Been playing a little, but not as much recently. Kind of shifting gears towards Modern, which we'll probably talk about soon, but I know there's still a few weeks of RCQs that are standard, and I recently kind of checked and made sure that the RCs that those feed, which are both in May, in the US at least, are also standard RCs, so it's still pretty relevant. I guess now, I haven't said this on the podcast, I'm skipping the next Pro Tour, and I've deferred it to the one in Amsterdam, which is Modern, and that's because I'm having a kid. It'll be my first child in late April, probably. So the Pro Tour is like May 1st or something, so it's just a bit too close.
Boy, that's creeping up on you, huh?
Yeah.
It's exciting.
Yeah, definitely.
So the next Pro Tour is standard again? Is that what's going on?
Yeah, Pro Tour Secrets of Strixhaven will be standard. I'm actually still in my Team Boulder Discord for it. They just kind of launched that, so that'll be cool to see. Mm-hmm. I'm just hanging out. I might, depending on how involved I get, I might, seriously help them as a teammate, or I might just totally ignore it. But I'm glad they're still letting me hang out.
Yeah. Okay, so standard's still relevant. There will be some modern in the future, so something to keep an eye on. But yeah, standard's been pretty cool. I also paid attention to a bit of the decks over the weekend. I didn't see much innovation, to be honest. I mean, there's a little bit. And then when I've been playing myself, I've mostly been playing some brews, so not super up to date on all the meta stuff, but it'll be interesting to take a look at the results here over with you.
Yeah, there's kind of a new breakout deck in Standard, which is cool to see yet again.
Yeah.
Momo White is the name I like the most for it.
Yeah, it's pretty good. Let me find a list for that while you...
Yeah, if you go to the regional championship, there's one that got third. That's probably a good one to look at.
Let's do it.
Yeah, this is perfect. It's like the exact kind of stock list I'm used to seeing.
So Momo White, third place by Victor Medina.
Yeah, it's got a lot of classic, I guess, white mid-range things, which I know is a little kind of an obscure thing to say, but if you've played Magic for a long time, I feel like you might kind of understand what I mean by that, where it has some good kind of, get out of the gates fast kind of starts, but also has kind of a weird grindiness that white sometimes has, where it's good at kind of getting bodies on the board, I guess, without being too committal. Like, it's not too bad against removal or things like that, because your bodies in themselves are kind of 2-for-1s, and then it has, 4 Abandoned Air Temple to kind of scale those bodies into the late game.
So one thing I noticed about this deck is there's actually no new cards in it. So this could have been a deck played before.
Yeah, and even as I don't know exactly the timeline when Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles came out, but I know this deck just started winning a lot of challenges, and which, it doesn't always mean a deck's broken or anything, but I think its stats have been good. We'll get to that maybe now or later, but I think one of the coolest parts of this deck is it has Sage of the Skies, which is a card that every now and then I've seen on a feature match or something, but I think it's actually just a really powerful card. I don't know if I want to say surprisingly powerful, but when you make that card work, and this deck can do it on turn two, which is crazy. But when you actually get the copy off of it, it's pretty impressive because it's just I don't know. It's really hard to contest that much flying lifelink over two bodies.
Yeah, especially early and especially if you're pumping it up. So this deck, just to go over for audio only listeners, it's a mono white deck. It has mana acceleration in the form of Momo Friendly Flyer, which makes your flying creatures cost one less, and it uses Springleaf Drum also, which is interesting. So basically, you can tap your cheap creatures, your Momo. You've got Starfield Shepherd, so you can warp that in just for one mana with Momo, and then use the drum to add mana with that. Obviously, a warp creature can't attack or block, so it's the perfect thing to tap. You can even have a sort of quote unquote nut draw where you play turn one Momo, turn two you play Springleaf Drum, tapping the Momo for another mana, and then you can cast a Sage of the Skies kick,
Yeah.
so to speak. You get the copy on turn two.
If you do that, you might want to switch the order you play drum and Momo. You might not have the option, but a little less vulnerable
Gotcha.
to removal that way. You could play drum
Sure.
on one and then Momo plus
Because
Sage of the
Momo
Skies
won't be attacking anyways.
Yeah, and Momo conveniently says the first non-lemur creature spell with flying you cast each turn, so it doesn't count itself. So you can play Momo and another discounted flyer in the same turn.
Cool. Yeah, and then other than that, it's got some standout white cards that are already good in the format. It's got Steam Rip and Get Lost as removal spells. It's got Hylia, which works pretty well with this strategy. It's just gives you some life gain, gives you some card advantage. Cosmic Grand Zenith, sort of the and between that and Abandoned Air Temple is sort of your plan to pump up your creatures, your Sage of the Skies, and whatnot once you get them into play.
Yeah, and also the Starfield Shepherd package is a great kind of grindy package. You can just keep warping Starfield Shepherd and getting Nurturing Pixie and picking up the Starfield Shepherd and get, a lot of 2/2 flyings that way, and then end that chain getting Figure of Fable. Or maybe the first time you warp a Starfield Shepherd, you just get a Momo. Especially, you could go like turn one Drum, turn two Starfield Shepherd, Momo, something like that, just to get the Momo out, which is, definitely a key card of the deck.
Yeah, and I like the one or two Figure of Fables that people play. Gives you something to do with all this mana that you're going to end up with all these Springleaf Drums, and if you end up searching for planes with your Starfield Shepherd.
Yeah, and this list has a Curious Farm Animals on the sideboard. Sometimes you see that main. I'm sure that's just kind of a meta call. A nice little kind of disenchant effect to tutor for. It also gains 3 life, which is not irrelevant with Hylia in your deck, so that's kind of cool.
Mm-hmm.
And then,
so this... Sorry, go ahead.
Just the interaction of 4 Seam Rip, 4 Get Lost, which is like, those cards have their flaws, but I think when you're playing a shorter game, those flaws are a little less apparent because, Seam Rip's flaw is that it's vulnerable to removal or, maybe even getting Boomerang basics to kind of unlock what you've exiled, and Get Lost, obviously your opponent can do a lot with the maps, but if the game isn't, lasting 10 turns like a control deck might try to play, your opponent might have a lot less opportunity to get those advantages from those cards.
Yeah, this deck is decently aggressive. It doesn't interact a ton, so I don't know how it would fare against the Badgermole style of decks. Guess you've got 4 Clarion Conqueror in the sideboard. That's kind of nice.
Yeah, probably. It does have 4 Clarion Conqueror. It's worth noting with Springleaf Drum, Clarion Conqueror can be kind of a non-bow, but you'll take what you can get, and Momo into Clarion Conqueror is probably quite the hammer against them.
Yeah, and maybe getting it out early is kind of good.
Yeah, I mean, if you in the matchups you want Clarion Conqueror, I'm sure you're not that sad to shut off Springleaf Drum, and I imagine you probably still keep your drums in for kind of your nut draws because, I mean, the turn 2 Sage of the Skies thing is really powerful. Even if you don't pump those bodies, a 4-point life swing every turn is kind of just going to win. It's
yeah, and a lot of the
stuff, but
a lot of the decks in the format care about your life total. If you gain a lot of life, you might buy yourself some time against the mono green deck, buy yourself a turn if they don't have enough landfall triggers or whatever to kill you, and then obviously against prowess, having some life gain is nice.
Yeah, there's one card I really wish these decks played, maybe over their second Figure of Fable. There's a little flexibility I see in the list. Like this list I see has 3 Voice of Victory, 3 Cosmic Grand Zenith. I've seen 4 Zenith, 2 Voice, minor stuff like that. But the card I really feel like would be a nice one of in this deck is Novice Inspector. just to get off the Starfield Shepherd. Not even necessarily because I plan on bouncing it with Pixie, but just, I think, a random body that you could buff up and get a card out of might be, more what you're in the market for than like figure and trying to level it all the way. But I think the most important thing is that it's two things in one body for Halia. So I just think you
Yeah,
would like maybe set up turns by getting Novice Inspector to get a card off Halia on a turn that you might not be able to do that.
totally. I'm a little surprised they don't have multiple inspectors, maybe, but maybe they tried it and maybe it was a little slow, but certainly one sounds good.
Yeah, like I've played one in Pixie like a year ago, and it's certainly very slow, but I also think that like what ends up happening is it's not that bad to just draw one of them and the one of them be slow. And then if the game goes long, the like thing where you start picking it up, you're kind of happy to have as an option.
Right. Or have it tutor or give you some wrath protection or something if that's what you want. Makes sense. So this deck actually, too, jumping ahead a bit, did pretty well. We'll show in a second, we'll show the win rate matrix of these 3 tournaments over the weekend that Frank Karsten put together. And the Momo deck, let's see what the Momo deck did.
Yeah, it actually had the highest win rate with a pretty big sample. Maybe not as impressive as Landfall, given Landfall was the most played deck in almost all of these events, I think, and still had a very
the
high
first
win rate.
thing that jumps out to me is how popular the deck was.
Yeah, it's really been picking up steam. It makes sense. It's kind of the breakout Magic Online deck. Not even very expensive. So for these paper tournaments, I see $185. Not bad to just pick up a deck.
Easy to put together, yeah, and a
Yeah.
lot of that is probably mostly in a couple of cards too. So if you already had
Yeah.
those,
Voice of Victory and Cosmo Grand Zenith are the big ones. Yeah.
so 56% win rate over the weekend. That's excellent.
Yeah, and looks like pretty good matchup spreads, though. Its worst matchup seems to be Landfall, which is arguably the best deck in Standards. But, having a bad matchup against the best deck does not disqualify your deck if you're, percentage is percentage.
Surprises me how well it does against Lessons, apparently.
That one is less surprising to me. I mean, I really think that, like, when you put Pressure, Seam Rips, and Get Lost in your deck, it's quite the good recipe against Lessons. And your Pressure is in a way that's not just horrible against spot removal, because, it's a lot of 2-for-1 creatures. And you have a bunch of answers to Artist Talent. You don't have any answers to Monument in your main deck, but also your sideboard has 4 SNPs, which honestly sounds like too many against Lessons. Maybe it's because the Reanimator matchup's awful, so maybe it's like a thing where you board in like 2 versus Lessons, but you have 4 for Reanimator.
I could see that.
Just stuff like that, or Spelementals. I could see having all 4 against Spelementals too, because I think most of their
3,
game plans
maybe.
aren't going to be that good against you besides putting Cinderflock into play. So the through S&P is kind of denying that is probably pretty valuable.
72% against Prowess, and Prowess was kind of the big deck for last weekend. So I mean, that's reason enough.
Yeah,
maybe
Prowess
for
has been
people
kind
to pick
of
up the deck.
the second breakout deck, and also pretty funny because I would say it looked like Landfall and Prowess have been basically the 2 most played decks in all these events, though not by like a big amount. They both seem to be, like 10-ish% of the field. So that's a pretty awesome standard that, the 2 most played decks are only about 10% each of the format. It looks like Prowess was maybe a bit more looking at its sample size. I don't actually have the total percentages, but its sample size looks like it was actually the largest over the 2 weekends, or the multiple events. I think this is, 4 events total.
Since we didn't really get to talk about Prowess last weekend, looks like he got second place in the Magic Spotlight Richmond.
Yeah, and this list is pretty... Actually, this list is pretty different than normal. It's got main deck Eddie Merc Crabs. The normal list I see play about 14 threats, which is like 4 Elusive Otter, 4 Storm Chaser's Talent, 4 Slick Shot Show Off, and usually 2 Drake Hatcher main. I don't mind seeing Eddie Merc Crab main. I kind of think Drake Hatcher's kind of horrible Magic cards, but maybe I'll be wrong on that. And then kind of normal Prowess stuff, playing at sorcery speed for the most part. I mean, obviously Burst Lightning, Opt, it plays instants, but, you're trying to trigger Prowess and attack with your creatures, so you want your cards to all be cards you're happy to cast in your main phase. Pretty low on counter magic, just a few in the board. And yeah, I mean, pretty surprising. It looks like the decks kind of that were around when Cutter was legal, but Monastery Swiftspear rotated, so they're on Elusive Otter instead. Um, and this was also a deck that, it was at the last Pro Tour. I played against it. I think I was one of the few Spelementals players to lose to it, and I played probably worse in that match than I did any other match that whole weekend. It's also the data, I guess, supports Spelementals is favored against it. But anyways, it did well against Cub. It did well against Lessons, which is surprising to me, the Lessons matchup especially. The Cub matchup is honestly a little surprising, but I think kind of the unblockable nature of Elusive Otter and Slickshot Show Off kind of let you be pretty fast against them, I guess is the theory there.
Yeah, and you're evasive, and if they don't interact much, like I imagine this is pretty good into mono green.
Yeah, and I'll also say as someone that's played a lot of weird prowessy decks on Arena, when you put like Storm Chaser's Talent, Boomerang Basics, Slickshot Show Off, and Stock Up in your deck and the cantrips, I think you're like enormously favored versus all the control decks in the format.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
You're just gonna sculpt into some as long, and these decks have protection spells. I guess this list in particular doesn't have the Secret Identity is a card I'm used to seeing as like a one or two of, which is the Spider-Man hexproof spell. That can turn something into a 1/1 hexproof, or it can turn something into like a 3/4 flying. And the kind of the idea behind that card is that all of your prowess creatures have 1 power anyways. So if you turn it into a 1 power hexproof thing, it's not changing its total power. It still knows all the triggers it got. And occasionally, if you don't need the hexproof, you can just use it as a pump spell that gives +2 power effectively, because it turns it to a 3 power creature.
Mm-hmm. So
Also,
it's like
maybe give an auto token flying, stuff like that.
Sure. So it's like a split card, giant growth.
Yeah, it's like a +2/+2 or a hexproof spell instead of something like Octopus Form, which is hexproof and +1, I guess. But yeah, I think when you play these types of decks against control decks, you just like plot the show off and cast your stock ups, and plus you have the pressure of your 1-drops, and it's really hard for them to just avoid like tapping out, and then they'll just like die to the show off pretty often when they tap out.
I will say control over the weekend was pretty absent, it looks like.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. And, I see Jeskai control not that popular, 46% win rate. The weekends before pre-release, when you looked at this graph, Jeskai control was like 35% or something.
Right.
It's not good into any of the top decks, I think.
And then you would see blue-black control and blue-white control still, and you don't really see that. That's probably all lumped into other, which didn't do well. Kind of the opposite story of the PT weekend, where Bruise did really well in the top decks, kind of got gunned for. This is, all the decks people expected, and I guess with the exception of Momo White, all did quite well.
Yeah. Yeah, and then on that topic, since the PT where we kind of had the Rhythm was the breakout deck and everybody kind of beat up on it. Now, with Mono Green being kind of this known maybe best deck in the format, and maybe even this Momo White deck, you keep thinking that Rhythm would be, pretty good, maybe the best choice one of these weekends, but it just keeps kind of underperforming. And, I talk with a lot of strong players that also, have felt like maybe at some of these events Rhythm would be the best deck. But we see Izzet Spelemental is actually quite popular. And when you look at the Rhythm deck, it's just like that same kind of matter of percentages where it's like, even though it has, the best matchup in the format, maybe against Landfall, its matchup against Spelementals is even worse, by a lot. And just little things like that, where there's still these decks that exist that kind of beat up on the Cub deck. And I guess, being kind of one of the originators of the Spelementals deck, I'm proud to see it still kind of keeping up with the format, where it seems like it's kind of like a, in this graphic, for example, it's pretty heavily favored against Prowess and then enormously favored against Rhythm. And it actually has, negative matchups against Lessons, Landfall, and Demir, which doesn't surprise me. I think those matchups are slightly unfavorable, but it's just like monstrously favorable against Prowess and Rhythm. So it's kind of making up for that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess to me, you guys did so well at the Pro Tour with it. It's not surprising that it's just a pretty strong deck on its own merit. It's also got, the Izzet shell that all these other decks are doing well.
Yeah, with. It's weird because that thing I was talking about with stock up and show off, kind of making you really favored against Jeskai control, weirdly is not present there as Spelementals. I think it's the Boomerang Basics talent thing is kind of the big difference there, where that's just like an engine that you're going to play towards as the game goes long. Whereas when the Spelementals deck goes long, even though you can like get a lot of card advantage with Winter Night Stories and discard maybe Sunderflocks that don't matter,
Yeah, it's
all
also
that card advantage
very
amounts to is playing 4/5s and 5/5s. You know, it's
the talents are uniquely powerful against control too because they offer early pressure. Most of the control like spells cost two or three mana, and a lot of them cost a lot more than that. So getting down a 1 mana play, that's annoying. And even if you like draw your one requiting hex or seam rip or whatever, you're still not even answering the full card. So that's kind of why that one's such a nightmare.
yeah, it's a true 2 for 1 for 1 mana against control because the game's just almost always going to come down to them needing to deal with the fact that you can level it.
Yeah, and sometimes it's more than that because it's actually like this late game engine that they have to respect, so they have to leave in, a high amount of power in their deck, so that makes them even clunkier and that sort of thing.
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
Um. So yeah, let's see what else is interesting. I kind of thought Bant Airbending might do kind of good into the field. Looks like it did exactly average.
Yeah. That might be
That
another
deck,
matchup that kind of gets. How's it do against? Let's see. How's it do against various things? So, really bad in the lessons makes sense. Pretty good in the landfall also makes sense. Behind versus Spelementals, yeah, it just seems kind of split average.
I would have thought it'd be better against Dimir midrange.
Yeah, I would have too.
Yeah, it potentially has a new card in the Michelangelo's Technique, I think is what it's called from the new set. Where
Yeah, you have to look at top eight cards for 6 EMC total across 2 bodies. Is that right?
I think so, yeah, but it's
Yeah,
5 mana, or
yeah,
I
or
mean, it
4 mana
has
to
a
sneak. Yeah,
and it's sorcery, so it's kind of like a collected company variant, but it's a little more powerful. But it's well, not more powerful overall because it's sorcery and more expensive, but the effect itself is a little more powerful because you can get like a 4 drop and a 2 drop, that sort of thing.
yeah. I've paid a lot of attention to airbending stuff for the PT or even various friends playing these events that we're looking at now. Um, it has this weird issue where like the so compare it to the rhythm deck where it's like you have this cub elf kind of core, but the rhythm deck's payoffs are like formidable speaker and nature's rhythm, which like can be more cubs if like your early game you get disrupted and you don't have access to mana. You just like get more cubs with these cards, whereas the airbending deck's payoffs are just expensive cards that kind of have really hoped that your early things have lived.
I I'm a little surprised that this deck only really sees play as a mana creature deck. I wonder
Yeah,
if you could get away from that at all.
I've looked at some weird variants. There's a lot of stuff you could do with it. Um,
I guess you need a green for Doc Orlock, and then you kind of want Aang at the crossroads.
yeah,
So it does make
yeah. The
sense
Doc
to play
Arlock
some
thing is
acceleration.
the big kind of factor. Yeah, I know a lot of people have moved away from Gene Pollinator and just play more lands. I don't think it's weird for these decks to play like 24 lands because they know they have to hit their land drops as their early game things die. They also, another incentive to play green is Bramble Familiar, which isn't, quarter the combo, but it is quite good for airbending and finding your pieces.
Yeah. So the joke with this is if you can play it as an accelerant, but if you airbend it, then you can cast Fetch Quest for 2 mana.
Yeah, or 0 mana if you have Doc. So
Yeah, but Llanowar Elves adds a green mana, which doesn't help that much with your casting cost of things.
yeah, that's definitely true.
It seems like maybe you could, and Baptismal Code would be weird to play by itself, so maybe you could just not play accelerants. There is like from Lorwyn, there's that 2 mana green enchant a land
Yeah,
acceleration thing.
or if you moved away from green or just splashed it for Doc or something, you could maybe use Ashling or you could use Momo as a weird accelerant. There's definitely some other options,
Yeah,
but it's all a
and
little weird. Also, like I was just talking about this with someone recently. I don't think Aang Swift Savior is like a very powerful card, to be honest. It's this combo piece that I think people kind of say is like a good card, but I don't think it's a very good card, I guess.
Yeah,
It's passable. It does some things, but I think it's kind of a little expensive for what it does.
it is. I kind of like what it does in some spots. It's really nice. It can be really nice against creature decks. It's like a flash threat. Certainly, the like I'm going to leave this up to interact with my opponent's expensive spell never really works the way you want it to.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I'm saying about the card is that like in the spots you're talking about, you've probably played it in small copies in some decks, and I just watch feature matches with airbending where someone just draws three and they kind of just lose because they drew three.
Right, because it's legendary and it's low
Yeah, and it's just
impact.
like
And
not good. It's already kind of below rate, and it's like a
mhm.
card that I think is flexible is kind of its advantage, where like you can flash it into a lot of different points in the turn and airbend something, and you have a lot of options as to what to airbend. But a flexible kind of clunky card, then being legendary and feeling like you're forced to play four, is a lot of kind of issues.
Yeah, and it's really where I've liked it is kind of out of the sideboard in matchups where you're kind of already ahead on cards and you're trying to trade quality for flexibility and a little bit of defense and whatnot. So yeah, it makes sense that you would say that about it in this deck.
It's pretty funny that at Worlds people didn't even know to play the Web Watch, but the Web Watch I think is like the best card in the deck.
Hmm. Yeah, so this is the 4 mana um when it from the Spider-Man set, 4 mana colorless card artifact. When ETBs, you exile top 2 cards of your library, and you can play those until your next turn. And then you can tap it to add 2 mana of any combination, but you can only cast spells from exile. But you can, you could tap this to cast an Airbent spell.
Yeah, and it's just so good with Appa. You can airbend all of your Web Watches, and they can cast themselves basically. Um,
Yeah,
and it just lets you
Appa,
see a lot of your deck. Yeah, Appa's great. I mean,
Appa's impressive.
yeah,
Yeah, it's kind of the key card. Well, obviously it's the key card in this deck, but also just in every game that gets played, what I see with this deck, Appa's really impressive.
yeah. No, Appa's the card you're happy to play four of, even though it's legendary. Whereas like both the Aangs, I think are Aang at the Crossroads looks really good when it hits Appa, but I think
Yeah,
when you don't see an Appa, it kind of looks mediocre too. Um, so yeah, if there was ways to kind of, obviously you need either Aang or Airbearer Ascension to combo with the Appa, but maybe you don't have to play for Aang anymore. I don't know.
I would be interested in trying Michelangelo's technique, maybe over these Airbend Ascensions in some number.
Yeah,
I like that you could attack with Aang and sneak it. It's kind of nice.
yep. That would help.
Um, what won these events? Looks like
Yeah, so this
the
this rhythm deck's pretty cool. And I was talking about rhythm, and it's kind of cool because this is, I think, another kind of innovative rhythm deck again. This one is pretty white based. It has four seam rip. It even has a main deck Beza. Um, and the card in the finals that really overperformed out of the sideboard is Sage of the Skies. I watched that, and in the finals it beat Esper Pixie, and man, can Esper Pixie not beat 2/2/3 Flying Lifeline? Or I guess this one of the finals. Yeah, it was the finals. Yeah, yeah. The two bodies of Sage of the Skies. Not doing anything fancy to power it up, but it makes sense in the sideboard. It's a card that pairs kind of well with mana acceleration.
yeah, it does, and it's super good against red decks as sideboard. And yeah, honestly, just like flying blockers is really good against Kaido decks.
Yeah, and yeah, just turn three. I think he just had one fourth mana on turn three because your deck's all mana dorks, and he played a one drop in this and kind of just prevented his opponent from pressuring him at all. And then he just kind of did his normal rhythm thing and had a lot of time.
Yeah, that's very nice. So this was the first place deck from the Turin Regional Championship. Pretty nice. It's got Mockingbird and the whole like combo aspect.
Yeah, a lot of
Couple
the stuff.
Ouroboros.
The RC that Tristan won kind of innovated on this deck. Tristan didn't have any Ouroboros. And even though it's only one Bright Glass Gearhulk, I think it's a card you often rhythm for. And then from there, it's kind of sweet because you can get this interaction in the deck between Soul Guide, Melt Shredder's Resolve, and Seam Rip. But what you usually do is get one of those, and then you get a Mockingbird. And if they don't answer your Bright Glass Gearhulk, you just threaten to keep doing it the whole game.
Oh, nice. That must be really good in the green sort of mirrors where the other decks don't have a lot of interaction.
Yeah, and also like in the like having the seam rips for lessons is probably a big deal. Um, and when Tristan won the RC, he actually fit in four um, formidable speaker, which this deck has zero of. But he was pretty all in on that package. We see some cool things too. This deck kind of five color in a sense. It has a spider manifestation. It doesn't have the one of explosive prodigy, which is pretty common in these decks. Even in the sideboard, I've seen it. Which just another tutorable kind of thing that can sometimes answer Clarion Conquer, which is pretty cool. If you can get a third color out, that definitely requires like a Riddler a lot of the time, but maybe a Seam Rip. Um,
That's the one in
it's
a red ETB 1/1 Vivid,
Yep,
deal X damage to target creature.
yep. Where X is your Vivid, and these mana bases. They have four starting town. This list doesn't have four Verge. I'm used to seeing four, or sorry, not Verge, Multiversal Passage. So I'm used to seeing like four starting town, four Passage. They'll have four Gene Pollinator. Their mana base will look like the mana base of a Bant deck. They don't actually have any symbols that have red or black on them. The Spider Manifestation can produce red though, so you kind of can just free roll the Explosive Prodigy
Yeah,
if you
especially
wanted
as
it.
a tutorable target.
Yeah, and then the one that from the PT was kind of innovation. Which, to be fair, when Tristan won the RC, I think it was release weekend of Lorentz, so maybe didn't test all these cards. But Champion of the Weird, um, that I think is kind of the creature deck Mirror Breaker, which there's no
Nice.
goblins here to champion. This is purely to try to hit off rhythm, I think. Unless there might be some, secret goblin I'm missing. But yeah, that one. But
Chomping
definitely
changeling.
you're hoping
That'd
you
be
don't
hard to
draw
set
it.
up.
It's kind of funny because this list without the formidable speakers really doesn't want to draw it. At least in the lists that have like four speakers, if you drew the champion, you have outs to convert it into another card. Um, I think this list at the PT even had Superior Spider-Man, which is pretty funny. You could like discard your champion to get Spider-Man and then Spider-Man it.
That is funny. Yeah, so nice deck. Maybe this is the evolution of this deck, at least going forward for now. Again, no real new cards. We've got one Leatherhead Swamp
Yep.
Stalker in the sideboard. Not bad.
Yeah, it kind of these that four drop's a little weirder to me, and also the Beza is. I'm wondering what that's for. What matchup was the one that Beza in the main and side were that appealing for? Because you're not really going to be behind on creatures with this deck.
Maybe Prowess? Just for
Yeah,
some
but
life gain?
yeah, weird.
You think you'd rather want some interaction to kill the creatures rather
Yeah,
than.
like when you play this card, I can imagine you gaining 4 life and drawing a card a lot, especially because your mana base is really painful. But
Yeah.
um,
Maybe it just sort of fits nice in a lot of games and they figured it was a inclusion that they were happy to have.
yeah,
Where it's not a standout anywhere, but it's sort of nice. And then I mean people still play things like mono red occasionally, right?
yeah, if there was just like one in the sideboard, that would
Mm-hmm.
be something that I could see. But the fact that they went out of their way to main deck one and then play another in the sideboard, I'm really curious.
Well, maybe
What
they thought this
matchups.
Rakdos deck would be pretty popular.
Ooh, that's not a bad one. That one kind of burns you out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we could talk about that. That one has got some new cards. Let's see if this.
Yeah, let me find a list.
Yeah,
Looks
10th
like one
place.
got eight. This
What
one
do you
got
find?
eighth at the spotlight. How about
Okay,
that?
yeah, let's look at that. I'm curious how they built their deck. I saw it got renamed to Rakdos Rummaging, which makes sense because this list has no monuments, which I don't think is crazy. I don't like the name Rakdos Rummaging because I think this deck has a lot of cards that don't rummage, so I don't really get why you'd call it Rummaging. It's a Rakdos discard deck is what I would call it. When you
Yeah.
play,
So tell me about Cool but Rude.
yeah, I had this in my top 10, and it's kind of doing what I thought here, where um, this deck has 8 1 drops. You can play this, get the rummaging online right away. I'm sure some games you get level 2 kind of fast and do a slow burnout thing, but I think what ends up happening is you kind of play your aggro deck normal game plan with, you spend 2 mana on this, which might, not help with the board too much, but at least the rummaging is hopefully growing Moonshadow and definitely growing Mako. And then if you're discarding Flamewake Phoenixes and Bloodghast, that's great too. And then at some point, if you have especially a flail or a wow, this list does not have the elf. I'm so surprised. I'm used to seeing 4 copies of Iron Shield Elf, this list has Fear missing out. That I hate that. I would just play elves in this deck. They seem really useful,
I kind of
which
hate it too.
lets you discard a card on command. At which point you could just discard any cards in your hand to deal 2 damage each, which can be a lot of burn. I like this list has the 1 Carnage because I think, that's not a bad card to just draw and discard and get the Mayhem value, and you can return something. Even if that thing, is going to die after 1 combat, you're all about damage anyways, so that's fine. And maybe you return Casey Jones and get a cool ETB. But what I like about having this 1 Mayhem card is that level 3 of Cool But Rude is Gamble, which is search your library for a card, put it in your hand, then discard a card at random. And I think by the time you use it, you'll often have no cards in hand. And in fact, you could set up that up, maybe play your land for turn or discard all your cards, but then you can just get Carnage and effectively tutor it into your graveyard with the Mayhem available. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's pretty nice.
So it's a nice one of that I think is, you're probably not that unhappy to draw it as a one of in some games, but also it's kind of the best possible thing to get with Cool But Rude if you make it that far in the game.
It's a pretty strong card. It's just kind of situational and a little expensive, but perfect one of, especially tutoring for it.
Yeah, I was wondering. I've seen lists splash Riddler and 1 Winter Night Stories. That mana thing might be kind of tough. I was wondering if you could just splash the 1 Winter Night Stories and not change your mana very much from here. With kind of that idea being, so if you had an elf or a flail and you got the Cool But Rude, let's say it's, I don't know, let's say it's turn 5 and you kind of finish the game by going level 2 and level 3 and you had a blue up and you could harmonize the Winter Night Stories, then it's all the cards in your hand are worth 2 damage if you have hypothetically a flail or an elf. And then if you got Winter Night Stories and harmonized it, then the fact that you tutored it and discarded it is 2 damage, and then the Winter Night Stories will just give you 3 cards that you're discarding in one way or another. So it's 8 damage to have 1 Winter Night in your deck. And I figure, I don't know, if you draw the 1 Winter Night and you can't cast it, you probably just discard it. Maybe cast it later.
Yeah, especially for this deck, right? I mean, most decks you would say that, you discard it to Liliana the Veil or something. That's kind of a cop out, but this deck literally just has tons of way to make.
Yeah, and I'm talking about I just want 1, and maybe a mountain could be a River Pyre Verge, something like that. That's a Verge that goes in the right direction.
Yeah, and you've got Starting Town and Multiverse Passage. So
yeah, exactly.
I like that idea. I will say, I do like Cool But Rude. It fits. I can still think of advantages Monument has over this.
Yeah, and they don't have to compete with each other. It is, I guess, a spell you play that's not helping your board presence. This one being a discard outlet, I think you should definitely play 4 Cool But Rude, I guess. But what I'd also add is, I don't know, you could put some Monuments in your sideboard or still play 1 or 2 main. It's not a card you have to play 4 of to be good. It's still an angle that might be difficult for, especially a control deck based around Seam Rip and Get Lost to deal with.
Yeah, that's sort of my thought. It's a lot harder to, it doesn't get Seam Ripped, Get Lost, or Spell Snared.
Yeah.
And some games, if they're on the grindier side, I feel like the card advantage from it could really matter.
Yeah, I mean, this deck cutting the elf for the fear of missing out, you definitely have to play the elf with the monument. I mean, I understand why FOMO's a decent card, obviously, and when it definitely lined up poorly when you were putting it in the same deck with monument compared to the elf. But I don't know. I think the elf being indestructible is pretty relevant against Lessons. I've kind of heard that's kind of a headache for them.
Yeah, the elf just seems like a pretty strong card and more fitting for sure.
Yeah, and it's a card you'll untap with Inti, and you can do the Inti combo with because that's pretty powerful.
I mean, I could still see wanting some number of fear missing out, but
yeah, another card, a pretty obscure one, also with Mayhem because I've looked over the Mayhem cards for this deck. I wouldn't mind seeing the first Swarm in these decks. Random draft common from the worst drafted set ever, but that's
no, you're gonna have to explain that one to me.
Yeah, so it's 2 and a black for a 2/2 flash flying, and it has Mayhem for single black. So just another card that the goal is, it's like another Bloodgaster Flamewake Phoenix in my mind, where the goal purely is just to discard it and Mayhem it. And I think it's the best 1 mana Mayhem thing. It's legendary, so I don't want to play a bunch. And I just think from what I've seen with this deck, you have to discard cards for your stuff like Flail to work. I like that you could play a 1-drop, you could play a Flail, you could discard a card that costs 1 to Mayhem and still cast it. So that's what's kind of appealing to me. And that's, the curve where you're attacking for 4 with your 1-drop on that turn, and you also put a 2/2 flyer into play. Obviously, you'd prefer to have Flamewake Phoenix in that spot, but still, I think it's like nice to just kind of increase the density of cards that you're pretty happy to discard the Flail on turn 2 in your deck.
Doesn't Avatar kind of have a card like that? The Wolf Bat? I'm trying to look it up.
I think the Wolf Bat requires you to draw multiple cards in a turn.
But yeah. This is draw your second card each turn. You get out of the graveyard. Okay, never mind.
Yeah, Cool But Rude does that, to be fair, but...
Sure. Or Monument.
Yeah.
But not quite as fitting, yeah.
And especially if you fit in Casey Jones, more stuff in that category, I guess, is also appealing to me. And the fact that it has Flash, I think, is relevant, because, you could, especially if you have the Elf, you could discard on your opponent's turn.
Yeah, have you seen any games with Casey Jones in this deck?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty cool. You late game can maybe get some card advantage out of it if you kind of ideally play this as the last card in your hand. But even if you don't get card advantage out of it, if you have Cool But Rude, that's a lot of damage. If you have the level 2 Cool But Rude, just to get 3 more cards that you're going to discard one way or another. I've also seen it in versions with Monument. You get some like immediate Monument value, I guess, where like if you had the discard out in play and you play this, you just still end up discarding your whole hand that turn, or between your turn and your opponent's with the Elf or something, and getting just a lot of damage out of Monument and Treasures.
Yeah, I like this card. I think it could, you could probably put it in mono red decks too, although I guess those aren't really around.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing, is if you have the discard outlet, you play Casey Jones, and you have Marauding Mako and Moonshadow in some combination, then you could just grow those by a lot and go to no cards in hand on the turn you play Casey Jones, but that's 3 more cards that you saw to grow those things with.
Mm-hmm. It makes sense that there's only 2 here since it's legendary, and
yeah, two seems like a cool
curve.
number, and then with the 1 Carnage, that makes sense to me. It's a pretty high value thing to get with it, maybe.
This is kind of interesting how the sideboard. I hardly drafted Spider-Man, so a Spider-Man uncommon in the sideboard I had to read. Goblin Mantled Marauder, 1 red, 1/2 flying haste. Whenever you discard a card, it gets +2/+0 until end turn. A little slick shot show off action.
This card doesn't sound that good to me, but if I guess landfall is where you want this, just something to pressure them. Has flying. I like for grindy cards that Case of the Crimson Pulse card has been in this deck almost every time I've seen it. Kind of cool, really on theme, just cool grindy card. And then I haven't seen Carsey Revenant in this deck. That's kind of cool. It's both, maybe you want the flying lifelink body, but you could just discard it. It's a permanent, and then you could activate it later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it totally makes sense as a sideboard card. Let's see what else we got.
A lot of landfall. The winning list actually almost. I don't know if I want to say innovative. It's kind of reverse innovative. It looks like a list from pre-Lorwyn Eclipsed. It has no nurseries. Origins. Yeah, it's like it cut the nurseries back for Esper Origins, and then it's playing the hexproof spells with 4 Mossborn is in the sideboard. Serac main, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I'm definitely not attached to the nursery in this deck, but I guess I also have really not liked Esper Origins when I've played this deck.
Yeah, it's funny because I would think they'd be good against the same kind of decks. So I'd be interested to hear what this person's thought process was for running the Origins. Maybe it's just simply that you find it more often with Ice Tail.
I like the main deck Melch Charters Resolves, especially with Origins, I'll say.
Sure.
Having a cheap, high-impact permanent to get when you flashback Esper Origins is really nice.
Yeah. Gives you a body to fight with, too.
Yeah, exactly. Those cards play really well in combination, so that makes a lot of sense to me.
I mean, Royal Treatment seems like a pretty good fit for this deck if you just want to lean into the Harmonizer draws, which I mean makes sense.
Yeah, I am always confused by royal treatment over Snakeskin Veil in this deck, but I said that recently in a Discord, and someone said they were at the event and talked to this guy specifically about it, and they've had these conversations with lots of people, I guess, and they just think this is better. Um,
What's the difference?
Snakeskin Veil gives a +1/+1 counter, which I would just think is way better with Mossborn Hydra, because Mossborn Hydra says you double the counters on it.
And this gives you a roll. Oh, but the roll has ward 1.
Yeah, so if you didn't have Mossborn Hydra, then the royal treatment is better. Though the second one is worse actually if you target the same creature, but that's kind of irrelevant as a 2 of. If you put, I'd be skeptical of 4 royal treatment over some split with Snakeskin Veil for sure. But yeah, I mean maybe the roll giving ward is probably better than I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty nice, right? It's like you protect your guy, and then they have to kill it again, but now it's going to cost them extra, and they're
Yeah, no, it's
maybe
definitely
fell
nice.
behind.
And maybe the matchups you want royal treatment are not the same matchups you want Mossborn Hydra. Now that I think about it, Mossborn Hydra is kind of just like my opponent doesn't interact with me at all, so I'll just board these in and maybe even board out royal treatment.
This deck's so funny because I look at it on paper and I can't believe it's the best deck in the format as a baseline.
Yeah, I mean, this is the deck I've played the most recently, and I'm totally love it.
It plays out really well.
Yeah. Does anything important like rotate anytime soon? I don't think so. That's nice. The next time I have to really care about standard, yeah, the lands will still be there.
Saz's Chocobo, really underrated card.
Promising Vein will be the first thing in this deck to rotate, I think. I mean, Royal Treatment will obviously too, but Snake, that's whatever.
Yeah. You know, the interaction with Earthbend and like Earthbend My Fable Passage is kind of broken too.
Yeah, no, so I've just like I can give some rundowns because I won an Ocelot Pride with this deck. I mean the hardest parts about this deck are what order you play your lands in and how you Earthbend and if you crack your lands or not. Usually when you look at your hand and decide what spells you're casting, that's like the easiest part of the deck. But everything surrounding how you sequence your lands and what you Earthbend is kind of the tough part. But I like this deck because it just really rewards you for kind of figuring out those sequences. And it's all proactive cards. It's surprisingly fast. The Mightform Harmonizer card is a lot better than I thought it would be. When I first started playing with Harmonizer in this deck, I thought it was kind of not on theme for what I wanted, but it turns out it's just quite good at generating lethal. One of the cool interactions, and this is useful for playing against this deck too, if you play an Icetail Explorer and you play an Escape Tunnel from your graveyard, you pass the turn. If your opponent just like taps out, puts a bunch of blockers into play, you can not crack your Escape Tunnel, go to your turn, play Mightform Harmonizer, make the Icetail unblockable with the Escape Tunnel, and then just play it from your graveyard twice, and it's 32 unblockable.
Yeah, I died to that. It was really obnoxious.
And it's a very common sequence. It's not that it's a pretty easy sequence to have. It's pretty crazy that works.
Yeah. I mean, Icetail is probably the most important card in this deck.
It's a card
from what I can tell.
Like it's nice, especially with that Mightform trick. I think that it just like is obviously going to enable things. It being in the deck is why like Saz's Chocobo is so strong, because it's just going to give you basically infinite landfall triggers and a lot of them really fast. And to be clear, like the Chocobo in this deck is just amazing in the sense that like obviously it's your best card to play on turn 1 or 2. And start beating down really quickly. But like what you'll find is that like you'll just draw this card on turn 5 and be attacking for 4 with it on the next turn very often and things like that.
Yeah, and when you look at this deck on paper, it looks like you would just be able to beat it by playing a bunch of, black removal spells or something. But the fact that like the Chocobo costs 1 and it becomes very threatening very fast, and then each turn they play something that needs to be answered, a lot of the time getting value also. They can play their Bashful Cub and put the Earthbend on a Fable Passage, so it's kind of a ramp creature even if it dies. They've got Surok. Icetail Explorer pretty much comes down and gets a land right away. Bossing Say, really good against that sort of thing. And then, Earthbender's Ascension. Another card I've been super impressed with. Just puts a lot of, like, cardboard, so to speak, onto the board, and that ability to put both a +1/+1 counter and also Keeley Grant Trample is
Yeah,
huge.
I've said actually kind of early on in Lorwyn Pro Tour testing, in this deck specifically, the Earthbender Ascension feels like a Fable of the Mirror. Like you get a 2/2, you get an extra mana, you you just like have this thing that sticks around that is just gonna like totally take over the game. It's very similar.
It feels really backbreaking, especially when they play it on turn two off of Llanowar Elf. Holy.
Yeah, this list is pretty low on Promising Vein. I was pretty big fan of that card. My current landfall list has a 27th land, and then it uh, has one less Bossing Say and two more Promising Vein, which
Okay.
is kind of where I've been at.
It makes a lot of sense. So you can play it early and tap it for mana, and then on your big turn you can crack it with
Yeah,
the
because like
landfall
in Badgermole
triggers.
Cub in this deck is less doing the mana thing and more just Earthbending is so powerful in this deck, and it's just one of the best cards that says Earthbend on it. And sometimes it does the mana thing for sure, which is awesome. But like in this deck, if you just have two forests, you didn't have it, your elf died or you didn't have an elf, and you just have two forests and play Badgermole Cub and play it on a forest, and then your Badgermole Cub dies, it's not very good. You won't really amount to much more in the game until you draw another Badgermole Cub. But if you have a Promising Vein, it's nice that you can just play Vein on turn two, Cub the Promising Vein, and have some leftovers off the Earthbend.
So this deck definitely feels like, at least to me, that it's kind of on top right now, and I mean the data is looking really good for it too.
Yeah,
What
and I think there's just going to be this struggle in this format, and I think Strixhaven could for sure just change up what's even good, but we're just like this deck kind of ticks all the boxes on. It makes sense that it's really good to me because it's like purely proactive, so it doesn't care that much about what matchup it's in, and I think it attacks from a surprisingly like different amount of angles. Like you can play the really fast with Chocobo and Mightform Harmonizer, so your opponent has to, they can't keep a slow hand against you, but Esper Origins or Sapling Nursery plus Ice Tail Explorer plus Earthbender Ascension can let you play really long games. So that's all just like a really good winning combination, which then kind of means the way you'd think to beat this deck is to be faster than it, which the Prowess deck is like a little faster, but the Prowess deck is certainly more the category of deck that I think is vulnerable to like a bunch of Doomblades. I know they have stock up in Storm Chaser's Talon, so that's not entirely true, but just a little bit more. And then the Cub deck is the premier kind of deck to beat this deck, and it's why this deck wasn't really played at the PT at all. But now, like I said earlier, the Cub deck is just facing so many kind of horrible matchups in the format that it's hard for them to get their feet off the ground. But it did win that regional championship.
Yeah. What's so with this deck doing so well, what would be your approach to tackling this deck? Are there certain cards you can add to existing decks to make it good, or do you think there's specific archetypes you should be playing?
Yeah, I mean, there's different things. I know like Wan Shi Tong out of the sideboard is more popular than ever. This deck does a lot of the searching thing. I like that this list in particular, the sideboards are usually more fight spells, graveyard hate, and disenchants and Mossborn Hydras. That's typically what you always see. This one has the Terrabotanist. I like that some of the disenchant slots here are with Paw Patch formation. I think that's a real nod to Wan Shi Tong. Even though you miss out on the ability to hit artifacts. The other option you'll see in this deck often is Origin of Metal Bending, which is kind of cool because it does the Snakeskin Veil type thing, which is obviously pretty powerful in this type of deck.
Mm-hmm.
Also hits artifacts. But yeah, when I played this deck, I had two Paw Patch formation in my sideboard too.
Nice against Slick Shot.
Yeah, that one's weirder because it's kind of horrible against their deck if they don't draw the Slick Shot, but maybe that's just too important.
Flash Freeze comes to mind, as an obvious
Yeah,
card. I don't know how strong that sort of strategy is against
no,
this.
I think Flash Freeze is certainly like the counterspell for this deck. People talk about, I think if you have two Annuls in your sideboard, you're probably supposed to bring in the Annuls versus this deck, but maybe not anymore. This list doesn't have that many enchantments compared to the versions of Nursery, or they used to have the World Wagon. And then, Get Out can counter almost everything in this deck. That's not a bad one. I think one of the cooler parts about Nursery is I actually kind of like it against counter spells because even though it's kind of clunky in the mid game, which I'm saying is like when you can first cast it when you have like four forests, and that would take your whole turn. you do hit spots where you can have, 5 or 6 forests and then play the nursery and another spell in the same turn, which is pretty good against counter magic.
Hmm. I will say, at least looking at this chart from the weekend of the 3 tournaments and the matchup spread, Mono Green has a really bad matchup versus Simic Rhythm, but everything else is like within 5%, with most of them being positive. So it's obviously a hard deck to attack.
Yeah, and Spelementals is a deck I would have thought is really good into this deck, but I think they really put the pressure on you to, have specifically a Thunderflock fast. There's some elementals in this deck that are annoying. The backside of Esper Origins is an elemental. Mossborn Hydra is an elemental. And also this list doesn't have it, but Sandman is an elemental. I'm currently playing a Sandman. The last time I played this deck in my main deck is something that just kind of hits kind of hard and is good to mill with Ice Till Explorer.
Mm-hmm.
And part of why I'm playing it is because I was playing against a lot of Thunderflock decks, and I didn't want to lean on just Torpor Orb. This list actually has no Torpor Orbs, which makes some sense. Demir Excruciator deck is less popular, which I think is where you really want that card. But Airbending 2 would be an example. Okay. And I'm curious, like, is a third place list here? How different is it? Like I said, I didn't necessarily want to call the first place list innovative. I wonder if these players work together. They're very similar lists.
They're very similar. Let's look at another one.
With the Terrabotanist really makes me think. Yeah, so this list is, innovating with 3 copies of Leatherhead.
Yeah. A card that I thought might be pretty good here. They still have 3 Sapling Nurseries, so that's kind of a lot of 4-drops, but...
Yeah, well, the Sapling Nurseries, yeah, I guess with Leatherhead too, that is a lot of 4-drops. I was going to say they don't have any Esper Origins, which is kind of a 4-drop also. The card that is never in these landfall lists that I really think is amazing is Bristly Bill.
Oh, right. You're a pretty big component of just like 2 of those, right?
Yeah, I mean, if it wasn't legendary, I would probably be playing 4. I'm really impressed with it every time I have it. I just think the ability, compared to like Mossborn Hydra, is kind of the card in my mind it competes with, which I understand Mossborn Hydra like doesn't need a lot to go right to kind of just kill your opponent, though it's not like always exactly lethal. Like if you curve this card into like even Fabled Passage, Ice Till Explorer, Fabled Passage, that's like 16. But
unless you have a Bristly Bill.
Yeah, but I guess what I'm saying is just like, for example, on my way to winning the Ocelot Pride, I had like a double spell turn with the Bristly Bill where the Bristly Bill got my opponent's like Flash Freeze or something before I played an even better spell, because I just like had on boards like Fabled, like Promising Vein, Earthbended Fabled Passage, hadn't played my land for turn, played Bristly Bill. If it resolves, I'm just gonna like, I think, lowering your curve and playing something faster is still like a thing that will result to faster draws. For example, you can play Llanowar Elf into Bristly Bill plus Forest, put a counter on the bill. This is certainly like somewhat, something you do in a green mirror because it's vulnerable to removal. And then on turn 3, if you Warp Harmonizer and have Fabled Passage or Escape Tunnel, you can stack the bill triggers on top of the Harmonizer triggers and attack for exactly 20 on turn 3.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm sold just to the fact that it's like another cheap card you can add to your deck that has some high impact late in the game.
I've just also like had the explosive like Elf into Cub plus Bill, and even though I don't get the landfall trigger off the Bill that turn, sometimes the matchups are just about being explosive and fast, and it's just a cheaper card, and it's definitely wild to me that like 1 is not just kind of an unmovable like card from this deck list.
Yeah, and I could see playing 2 also.
Yeah, like I've liked it enough that I play 2. It's cool with Leatherhead. If you're exploring playing with Leatherhead, you can put counters on Leatherhead, which when you first say that sounds like, oh, that's cool because you could hit them and remove the counters. But I think what's actually cool is that you just have like a 10 power Leatherhead and they die.
Big hexproof Trampler, yeah. Maybe this is Leatherhead bad in the mono green mirror. Maybe I could. I
think so. Yeah, I mean I was kind of worried about, like you said with the clunkiness. I really want to play 4 Ice Till 4 Harmonizer in this deck. I've been pretty sold on starting with 4 Might Form Harmonizer. I do trim them a lot in matchups that are a bit more interactive. I definitely want to have access to it in every matchup, because your opponent in every matchup will sometimes just tap out and die to it. But it's certainly like a card that can get stuck in your hands in multiples and stuff like that. So I'm not like, hating the fact that I see 3 in being a number these decks sometimes play, but I personally like 4.
It seems like a card that, if you were expecting a lot of lessons, this seems really nice. I did actually see some feature matches over the weekend where this was played against lessons players, and it, looked like a nightmare.
Yep.
For
Yeah,
them to
it
deal
plays
with.
poorly into, your opponent boarding into a lot of counter spells, which is already a thing they kind of do. That's worth noting too.
Yeah.
But yeah, counter
Um,
spells and Wan Shi Tong also play well together. So certainly, if you're a blue deck, that's the direction I'd take right now. And
Flash
to be
Freeze
clear,
and
like,
Washitong.
yeah, Wan Shi Tong also, or Get Out is fine too if you want something for other matchups. But what's nice is, like, to be clear, you're probably playing the Wan Shi Tong on turn 2 a lot of the times versus this deck.
Or 3, or whenever you can fit it in, pretty much.
Yeah, but like you're just punishing them for searching. Playing it in response to Earthbender Ascension for 0 and stuff like that. That's what I meant by, like, yeah, on turn 2. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. You're not, like, making sure you get a big value one or something. I will say, like, if control is going to make a comeback, it might be now. Like, this metagame looks more approachable than previous ones. Momo White's probably a pretty decent matchup. I'm a little unsure about the landfall, but you could probably make some moves to make it decent.
I'll say, from looking at the graphics week after week, in this graphic you've posted, Jeskai Control has a 24% win rate against landfall.
Yeah,
So
that's
there's
really
a lot of
bad.
fixing. And in my experience,
Maybe don't play Jeskai.
it's just like what I was talking about, where the landfall deck is just like, I'm going to play Saz's Chocobo, and that's going to be a thing you have to. It's just every single card in their deck is something they have to deal with. And even though, the Jeskai deck can certainly have sequences that line up against the landfall deck's curve, that sequence is not, predetermined each game. So the landfall player might have a hand that has no Saz's Chocobos and or elves, and is just playing, Earthbender Ascension into Ice Tail Explorers, and then eventually, like, Sapling Nurseries, but it might also just have, like, turn 1 Chocobo, turn 2 Chocobo. So it's just, like, not something, when you're keeping and mulling as Jeskai, that you're ever going to be able to play around. You just kind of have to hope that your reactive cards work.
To be fair, I don't really like Jeskai Control.
Yeah,
I kind of like the other control decks better.
that's totally
Uh,
fair. Yeah.
Blue Black or Blue White. I think Jeskai Control in theory has is maybe not as narrow in people's mind, but I think all you end up with is just a low win rate, even if your spread is slightly better.
Yeah. My friend Paul played Spelementals at the RC before the pre-release, and I think he beat Jeskai Control, which is a notably bad matchup, and I've talked about how Mistrise Village is, like, the most annoying card in that matchup. And he said his opponent didn't have any, which doesn't shock me because it's kind of terrible. Like,
Yeah.
it's a card they kind of need to beat counterspells, but it's also so often a tapped mono blue land in your 3-color deck. Like, so playing 0 in your Jeskai Control deck, but I used to, when Shiko, like, pre-rotation Jeskai Control was a thing, I thought, the Mistrise Village was a totally troll card to play, and just kind of a noob arena trap.
Yeah, I know some people would play it in, like, obviously in blue white control. It's terrible there. It's
Yeah,
in
never untapped.
Jeskai,
Yeah.
I kind of get it because you can't really fit in other utility lands, so at least gives you something.
Yeah, right. When I was tested for the PT, I lost a game where on turn 7 I played my Mistrise Village and just assumed it was going to be untapped. It wasn't. Like,
Yeah,
it's
it
also,
makes sense
it
that
could be
play
1
most of
instead of
those.
2 or 0, stuff like that. It's pretty surprising to me that 2 is forever in all the deck lists when, you could play, like, I don't think they're maxed out on shock lands. You could just play a shock land that makes 2 colors instead.
Yeah, I've always just thought that card too, like,
Their deck has 4 Lightning Helix too, so like a tapped mono blue land is also not good for sequencing
right.
in your 4 Lightning Helix deck.
I don't know. I've always just thought cards like that, like, they don't actually turn games you were losing into games you'd win, because it feels like a lot of the games where you'd have time to add 2 more mana to your big spell are games you should be able to navigate anyways. if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
but it's just awkward when your win con is so clunky, like the Jeskai Revelation.
I think that is, yeah, the big thing. It's like specifically when you're trying to resolve Jeskai Revelation against
Yeah,
like
which is weird
blue
because it's a
tempo
7 drop.
decks.
But
Right.
I do understand, and like I said, Spelementals, that card's a nightmare. Luckily, Jeskai Control isn't very popular or good enough that I would really hedge for it as Spelementals. But like I think recently Magmatic Hellkite has come to mind as a card. If I was really trying to beat Jeskai Spelementals, I'd probably look to that card.
Just as like a big haste creature.
No, sorry, the Magmatic Hellkite's the one that destroys a land.
Oh.
So
Yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah.
both kind
That
of
makes
a
sense.
thing that they have to answer because it's a 4/5 flying, but also
Mm-hmm.
it can answer Mysterized Village and turn on your counter spells.
Yeah, that sounds very nice. And
But I
I
wouldn't
don't think they
actually
play
play
a ton
it
of
in a
basics
tournament
either.
right now because I would just hope I don't pair against them.
Right, right. All right, there's one more deck I want to look at from the weekend. This Esper Pixie by Samuel Estradi got
Yep,
second
PT
at
champ.
the regional.
Yeah, a lot of differences from the CFB lists that I played against 3 times at the Pro Tour and I'm super familiar with.
Yeah, and it's got some new cards, so it's like interesting.
Yeah, so it does feature 2 copies of Dream Beavers, which we talked about in our top 10. Makes
Love it.
sense. Good with Kaido. Also, you know, it's like not the thing you're really trying to bounce with Boomerang Basics, Pixie, or Kieran, but it's not nothing either. This list notably has 0 Spyglass Siren, whereas the CFB list had 3 or 4. So this is down a couple 1-drops in that sense. Sig seems cool in this deck with the cheap flyers.
I've liked Sig. I've played with him a little bit. Again, he's legendary, and you don't need a ton of him, but he works pretty well with Kaido and the cards you play around him.
Yeah, no, I mean, just having straight up unblockable is definitely nice with Kaido. For example, Spider Manifestation or Leyline Weaver, depending on if you're playing in paper or online, is, a 2/2 reach that's very commonly played in this format and can sometimes prevent you from getting your Kaido down because you just have 1/1 flyers. So just a truly unblockable creature can definitely help you with that. The Momentum Breaker is a card that was absent at the PT lists, but as a Spelementals player, I was so happy that, it made sense to me that they wouldn't register that card in the Cub meta. It's horrible if your opponent just like Earthbends a lands, that's what you have in your hands. But
Yeah, I feel like I'd be afraid to play this main deck, but I guess he's only
yeah,
got
main
one.
deck, yeah. But putting 1 or 2 of these in your sideboard as a Pixie deck right now, because it is pretty backbreaking, I think, for Spelementals, though maybe that's untrue. It does cost 2, and I learned, as someone who's played a lot of Spelementals and thought about it, that when you're thinking about how good Spell Snare is in a matchup, I wouldn't think about it in terms of quantity of things you can hit with Spell Snare, but more the quality of things you could hit with your Spell Snare. Like, what are the truly important cards? And I think in this matchup, their 2-drops are actually all pretty important, especially post board.
Yeah, especially when I think of Spell Snare. Also, I think of 2 decks that have 2-drops that are good into the late game too.
Yeah. It's kind of funny to see the 0 Sirens in this deck and the Dream Beavers.
Yeah, I'm trying to
Because,
figure out if it's like a mana based thing. It's not
well, the
really.
Bloom-like Verge, yeah, is the blue first one, which is the only Verge they have.
He did get to go with 4 concealed courtyards because of it, I guess.
I think that was Concealed Courtyard is the only fast land you can play, so I feel like that's been normal anyways.
Yeah.
But anyways, the Siren, the map token is actually pretty good in this deck because you have 4 Kiorans. When I played against all of these players playing Pixie, they were just, picking up their maps with Kieran to draw a lot, which is pretty powerful.
Yeah, that's pretty nice. Yeah, I'd be curious why they decided that. This deck looks okay. I mean, it's so funny. It's just like all these decks are just different variations of how to put Kaido into play, pretty much.
Yep, that's still the thing to do. I wonder about the make 3/1 ones or the last run is technique card in this style of deck.
Yeah, I'm a little surprised. I mean, I guess the set came out pretty or like these tournament, like the set kind of just came out, so people didn't have a lot of time to experiment.
Yeah, it's a weird card because my kind of ideal deck I have in mind for this deck definitely has Kaido. It definitely has a lot of the stuff that goes around supporting Kaido, And then, you make 3/1/1 ninjas, so you would just be embleming the Kaido a lot more and having this permanent value that's kind of untouchable. But obviously, if you resolve a Kaido, things are usually going pretty well for you in the game. So I would certainly would maybe want to see another card in my deck that rewards me for making 3/1/1s, if that makes sense.
Mm.
And maybe that's kind of the issue with it. I definitely kind of think a lot of the testing I've seen with this card is maybe hindered by the fact that people are going kind of all in on specifically ninjas, when I really don't think you have to put more ninjas in your deck. I think plussing Kaido is underrated anyways. I think I said that last time. Especially because there's a lot of Seers. Versus any deck of Seer, you should seriously consider just plussing Kaido right away.
Maybe like Cosmogrand Zenith?
Yeah, that's not bad because it's cast on Sneak, but then that's kind of cool with the bouncing thing. Or maybe something where like Kaido is kind of bad against these green creature decks that play to the board really quickly. But what if you boarded out your Kaidos for Cosmogrand Zeniths and then got to keep in the Last Ronin's technique, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. I kind of thought this Turncoat Kunoichi would be a good card.
That's kind of the Fiend Hunter that's permanent if you ninjutsu it for 4. Am I right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Seems decent against all these green decks. And, it's also a ninja, also a sneak.
Yeah. I mean, I think against the green decks, the nowhere to run, Grim Bobble, bouncing it type of stuff,
good enough.
Is where your whole deck is Shriek Maws or whatever. This list has Flood Pits Drowner too. That was not in the CFB list. Interesting.
Flood Pits Drowner is a pretty nice card, I will say.
It's definitely one of the better cards for getting Kaido down, I'll admit.
Yeah,
it's a card that
specifically
is I think it's a card I would call overrated, I guess. Especially in these types of decks. This is taking place from a long time ago, but testing for PT Aether Drift, there was the finals of one of these early Spotlight series was won by the mono red Leyline deck splashing for Questing Druid, and they beat a Dimir bounce deck in the finals. And if you watch those games, it looks like the Dimir player is supposed to kind of just win them. And if you just pay attention to why they lost, it's because they played a Flood Pits Drowner and didn't use the shuffle because it wasn't really worth using the mana on. And then the game went so long that the creature got unstunned and they just died to it, basically. Like they didn't have the pressure to kind of overcome. And that was, back when it was Heartfire Hero or whatever that they had to deal with. But still, I think just kind of pointing at this deck, especially if they don't have the Kaido or the Kaido is maybe under attack, kind of lacks some closing speed. So it just kind of became a serious issue that the game went long and then you just had a 2/1 vigilance that didn't actually matter anymore and you were kind of down a card.
It just, in my mind, it just fits so well with Kaido that's kind of why it's always there. Is there something else you would play instead?
Maybe the Sirens, something cheaper.
Yeah. It does, it is this kind of pseudo removal thing for a really big permanent creature.
Yeah.
You need it.
No, yeah, and it's really good against Spelementals in my experience. It's a great card against them.
Yeah, and it's it's not nothing that you can tap an elf on turn 2.
Yeah, or an Earthbended Lands, yeah.
It's just so versatile, and the flash is nice, but...
Yeah, it's the same type of thing, I guess, where I don't think bouncing it is very good. It's good with Kaido. So the Pixie part of this deck, I don't think, but the part where you're kind of a Dimir deck, that makes sense, that it can be good.
Yeah, I'm not even really sold on the Pixies this is a Pixie list. I guess I'd be kind of interested in an Esper Shell that uses Kaido that's not a Pixie deck, that's more like a mid-range deck.
Yeah, same thing. Also, I like Voice of Victory still with Kaido and maybe Last Ronin's technique.
Mm-hmm.
That might be hard to fit in the...
Curiosity.
Yeah, the Curiosity, it might be tough in 3-color mana. Definitely not impossible, but a little bit.
Blue, turn 4. I guess you use a lot of white and black. Yeah.
If you truly only splash the Last Ronin's technique in sideboard cards, it wouldn't be as bad. Though you still want to have Last Ronin's technique on turn 2 some games.
Yeah. Before we leave, I've got some brews to share. Nothing I'm super, I just haven't had a ton of time to play them, to be honest. I mostly just deck built them and then played a couple games with them. And I'm pretty low on the ladder, so I just kind of win and then Don't learn that much. Cue them up here. So I'm kind of obsessed with Northwind Avatar,
Nice.
and I noticed that it's an avatar. So you can play
Nice.
it off of Cavern Souls the same way you can play Overlord of the Huntwoods off
Nice.
of Cavern.
Also, Aang, if you were inclined.
You could, yeah. Aang is also an avatar.
Um,
He's Northwind Avatar is also a spirit, so like you could
you use it with Wan
get
Chitong.
do it with Wanchitong, yeah.
Yep.
So this, you're in blue and red, so I figured I was going to use the lesson package, and then the joke here is Overlord of the Hauntwoods ramps into Northwind Avatar, and then also lets you have this Rainbow Land to do whatever you want out of the sideboard. I had a Death Begets Life, so that was something I was using the black mana for, but
Okay.
I mean, I don't know that I needed that. I took it out; it was so expensive.
I just thought of a really cool card to use with Northwind Avatar in your sideboard
Okay.
because we were talking about the creature types.
Yep.
It's Mox Jasper.
Ooh.
What if you got then
Maybe.
you don't have to draw a crappy Mox Jasper until you have a dragon,
Yeah.
but then you could play it with Spell Snare up or something,
Yeah. Maybe.
And also, maybe you just want to have extra mana, like especially if you're going to play 4 of this card.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just thinking it wouldn't be bad to get, a land sometimes. I see a Fountain Port, an example, but like what if instead of a land, you just got a Mox Jasper? If it lives, you have extra mana. You might get extra mana right away. Or maybe, it's turn. It also doesn't have to be exactly 1 mana extra you need, right? You could play it and play Combustion Technique on turn 6 or something.
Right. Potentially. North with the Avatar being the only dragon, that feels maybe a little weird if they just kill it.
Yeah, but if
But
you're playing
especially
4,
if you have ways to protect it. Yeah, you do
Yeah.
have 4. Yeah, maybe. Obviously, yeah, I got the Fountain Port just because in case you like ramp into it, you don't have a land drop, you can go get that. Some other nice ones to get, you can go get like a 1 mana spell, Cinder Strike or Boomerang Basic. Cinder Strike, you're always gonna have when you play the dragon, you can put a minus counter on that and kill an Ouroboros or something.
Yeah,
And
no, I love seeing like some cool things. When I think about what I'd want out of this avatar, I think about cheap cards, which is why also Mox Jasper came to mind. And then I think about, some like I don't even know the category of card, but I like that you're experimenting with some things here. But the category I have in mind is like an expensive but kind of narrow card that you don't want to draw until it's the right time in the game. And like Ugin makes sense, stuff like that.
yeah, Ugin, Just Revelation. Seasonal Weaving is like a card that, if you're gonna curve into it, it's not too bad. You can it bounces all non-token permanents. So unfortunately, and then also a mode on it is you can copy a creature you control or make a token. So you can like make a token and bounce everything except the token. Unfortunately, Northwind Avatar is on cast.
Yep.
But you do get the original copy back to your hand that you can recast the next turn. So that card's actually been quite nice, and I've tutored for it a lot.
Yeah, a cool thing you can do with the Avatar too is, and I mentioned Avatar Aang, you can airbend it and recast it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you'll see that in one of my other decks
Nice.
actually with
Yeah.
the Avatar.
Yep.
Yeah, so this deck I thought was maybe the worst of my decks, and it actually played pretty well. I don't know about the mana. I don't like having all these starting towns and caverns, but it's kind of the only way to make it work.
For double green, yeah. I mean, maybe I'm pretty skeptical of Overlord being the ramp spell, even though I appreciate the Avatar synergy. But I think you could definitely play a 3-color deck that ramps into the Northwind Avatar that doesn't need to play any starting towns.
Maybe we could play the Fedric Core, and then our Mox Jasper is really good.
Yeah.
That we go get. I didn't think of that.
You could play it with Caustic Exhale too. You could play like Grixis Dragons.
Yep. Speaking of Grixis Dragons, we'll build a deck. Don't have the core. This one's basically just like blue-black control, splashing red. And I've got
the core
Cavern
could go
of
with your
Souls.
sideboard Ugin too. Just saying.
That's true. Yeah. You might be right about that one. That one was not on my radar at all, so I never thought about it.
Yeah.
Sounds pretty nice now.
No, I just thought about the Mox Jasper would be kind of cool in this deck. I feel
That's
like
smart. Yeah. So I'm not sure this is the best way to splash it, but the idea is you've got Cavern of Souls, then Demolition Field for a mountain, or a couple of the dual lands. And blue-black control, it's a little narrow in the cards you can put in your main deck, so the idea is that Northwind Avatar, while acting as winning condition, also lets you get some some things like you wouldn't normally want to play like a Luis Pompous Pillager in your main deck, but without it, you don't have much life gain, so it lets you tutor for a life gain spell if you
No,
really
great.
need it.
That's a great example too. Yeah, big
Hmm.
mana sink.
You could get a suplex to answer an artifact from your blue black deck.
Yep, that's cool.
Um, Deceit, Ugin, yeah, all that stuff. I actually haven't played any games with this one because this is the most recent one I built. Just throwing some ideas together. Um, Dispelling Exhale in this deck. I've only got 6 dragons. That's probably okay. Maybe you don't need 4. Maybe you could play some number of Essence Scatter and Negates. But I will say, there's a lot of permanents that people play that like just having Essence Scatter is a little rough. Or Negate. Same with Negate. And this is obviously missing like No More Lies that Blue White has, so I think it's worth a try.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Exhale is never that bad if you were missing on the dragon, I guess.
Yeah, that too. Exhale can
Well, I
be
like this deck.
I thought you might.
Yeah.
So in our Stock Up Podcast Discord, I was snooping on the decks you guys were talking about, and you guys were talking about basically this deck minus Northwind Avatar because that hadn't come out yet.
Yeah, we had
And
a Jeskai Dragons list we kind of liked for the PT. At the time, I like that you have Leyline Weaver. I'm glad I don't know if I mentioned that or if you just found it, but I'm glad. It's a nice red mana dork that I think we didn't have in our lists because it was a 4 Clarion Conqueror deck, given the meta when we were trying it. But if you're not playing Clarion Conqueror, I'm a big fan of including some Weavers.
yeah, I think I saw one of the other patrons in the Stock Up
Yeah.
Discord talking about it, and I definitely thought it was a good idea just to give this deck some extra acceleration because this deck's pretty clunky if you don't have Ashling or Momo.
Yeah, and to add to that, part of what's I think is pretty cool about, especially now that Clarion Conqueror I think is a little bit out of the picture looking at this Boros Dragons deck. I guess either way, but kind of I think Sarkhan's just kind of terrible. It's not a very good card.
Yeah,
Ashling I think is a really good card. Ashling and Riddler are like best friends, and I like that you can have a second kind of real mana accelerant in addition to Momo. And then I think just especially in an open deck lists field when we were considering it, what was really cool is that like I think this deck kind of aggressively mulligans because you're mostly just looking for Ashling or Momo, or you could keep hands that maybe have you play various interaction and maybe you're like, okay, like I've just got some of my removal spells into my big dragons I'll keep. But because you mulligan more often, the fact that you're like splashing Riddler and Riddler is good with Ashling and Momo is pretty sweet.
yeah. And maybe you should have 4 Riddler, but obviously I wanted to try some Northwind Avatars.
Yeah, fair enough.
I played some games with this deck. It's pretty sweet. I got pretty destroyed by Blue Black Demons when I played against that.
Yeah. I don't know too much about the specific matchups.
Yeah, it just cause they could. I think control in general might be kind of rough. They can pick apart your early game, and then your deck becomes pretty clunky, and they have answers to it and whatnot. But yeah, Northwind Avatar has been pretty sweet actually, because you can ramp into it. If you need a land drop, you can go get the Quarry Mountain Monastery out of the sideboard. You can go get like Bering River region as more flying big things to cast. You can get Appa in games where your opponent doesn't have a lot of removal, and you can do some cool airbending stuff with Aang and Appa and Northwind Avatar.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, and then otherwise just some cheap stuff. You get access to the white here. You can get Rest in Peace or Exercise. That's pretty flexible against a lot of things. You still have the cheap stuff, some counter spells. Wasn't sure how many Clarion Conquerors I should play in the sideboard. Went with 2. I don't know how good it actually is against Spatchmold decks. I don't think I played against them.
It's pretty back-breaking, I think.
Yeah. Like, I don't know if if I'm supposed to have 3 and just board in all 3, or if I'm supposed to leave some in the sideboard to, like, tutor.
Probably not tutoring it. That's probably a bit slow.
Yeah.
So I would just board them in the board in, yeah. Have you tried Bounce Off in the sideboard with this dragon? That's kind of an interesting one to me. Kind of defensive in a lot of ways.
Maybe instead of Boomerang basics?
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Just something you could leave up and is really flexible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe. I didn't have a ton of way. What was I thinking about? I was kind of thinking about like a Planeswalker. If my opponent had a Planeswalker in play.
Yeah, I mean, Ugin comes to mind for sure. It's just like...
Maybe.
It's just a big Planeswalker that works.
Even just Jeskai, Revelation.
Yeah, no, and like...
Planeswalkers.
Yeah, I think... I would be... I like that you're experimenting and learning, but if you fine-tune these deck lists, I assume you would kind of find just like a one big thing kind of sideboard card. to eventually
Probably.
get. And
Yeah,
for the
like
most
maybe
part, the avatar is mostly about getting something small and flexible, but then maybe when you cast a second copy in a game, that's when you get your Ugin or your Jeskai Revelation. You don't actually really need multiples of these haymakers.
right. Probably don't need Appa plus Meringue plus Revelation.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
but it would be nice to have like one cheaper one. Like maybe I even thought about putting like one Riddler in the sideboard and then one big one. Like maybe
Yeah,
that's
no, and
Revelation.
it's also like a mix of like Riddler in the sideboard is a card you could also just board in. So it's like not
Totally.
that embarrassing as a sideboard card.
Yeah, it has been kind of hard to build. I definitely don't feel like I have it quite right, but that's what's kind of been really fun about that card. On rate, it's been. I was worried it wouldn't be very good, and it's felt actually pretty okay in the decks I've played it with it. Not 100% sure on that. I mean, you're paying kind of a cost, obviously, playing a 5 mana 5/5 flyer, but it's like a decent card to put into play.
Yeah, I
So
just found a list from the challenge that got 15th that was kind of an Ashling. It was like an Elementals list, kind of Grixis-y with Avatar.
okay,
So I was seeing what they had. They had a bunch of Duresses in their sideboard, but not bad to grab if you're playing that color. Fire Magics. They had the Into the Flood Maw. They had a Soul Guide Lantern. They did have an Ugin and a Riddler. They don't have any Riddler's main, so just one board. But then they also had Wild Ride. That's kind of a funny one.
yeah,
But,
it's not bad. I mean, I guess if your opponent was at what
8.
8,
Or if they have a
yep,
Planeswalker, maybe.
yeah, that's pretty smart. It's certainly the kind of thing where like if you could have 30 cards, you definitely have a wild ride.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So it's just a matter of priorities. Okay. Yeah. The other two, we're running a little long, so I'll leave that for the Patreon. I actually wrote a small blurb on these other two decks because they're ones I built right away. Welcome, one and all, to the Stock Up Podcast, your one-stop shop for stocking up on the information you need to qualify for the Pro Tour. My name is Alex Midas. I am joined each and every week by my co-host, Jacob Negro, where we talk about everything related to competitive Magic and how you can qualify for the Pro Tour. If you'd like to support us, the best way to do so is over on patreon.com/stockuppodcast. At the moment, we have one tier that's $1 a month, and for that, you get access to all of our exclusive content. For all of our patrons who have supported us thus far, on behalf of Jacob and I would like to thank you very much. And if you'd like to follow us also over on YouTube, that would be much appreciated. Of course, you can also listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. So thanks for listening, and please enjoy the rest of the podcast.
Nice.
Blue-green one with New Generations Technique and Michelangelo Improviser, and a Reanimator deck with Karai, Future of the Foot. So check those out over on patreon.com/stockuppodcast. And that'll do it for this one, folks. Thanks for listening. Okay, so one of the things that I've done is I created an X account not too long ago.
Cool.
And I created it under like myself, so it's not anonymous. And I decided that I wanted an X account that was just all gaming, and I was going to follow like zero politics or social stuff or anything. So just always be pleasant. So I've done that, and because it's new, I think it's still kind of malleable. So you told me a little bit, or you messaged me that you had gotten Pokopia for the Nintendo Switch, and I was looking a bit on Pokopia, and somehow this phenomena happened where my whole X feed is like Pokopia, and people talking about it and how much they like it, and whether or not they should get a Switch too just to play it.
Yeah, I guess that's what I was doing this last weekend.
Yeah, just played a bunch of that game.
Which, yeah, I've played like a lot of Animal Crossing before or Stardew Valley, so I definitely like those types of games. I actually have not played it the last couple days because I've just been busy with other things, but I'm excited to keep playing it. It seems, it's kind of a funny concept because Animal Crossing is already a Nintendo game, and it's kind of like they took Animal Crossing and Minecraft in some combination and then made it Pokemon themed, which makes sense to do. But I think it's just one of the best games of that genre ever. So that's nice, because kind of the quality of Pokemon games is mostly that they just rinse and repeat from generation to generation. And this is more of an Animal Crossing game than a Pokemon game, I'd say. It's just Pokemon themed.
Sure.
But it's really well done. there seems to be, I know people can beat the game really fast when they get it or whatever, and you could just focus on only the what the story tells you to do and probably beat it pretty fast. But as far as like what you could actually do in this game, it feels endless because you just like, and I won't spoil too much, but you just get, this big area that you're like trying to build habitats for Pokemon for. And you work on that and you like are restoring buildings and kind of leveling up. And then you can unlock, I don't even know how many more areas because I'm not that far into the game, but at least like 5 more areas that you just do that again with.
Okay.
Which is pretty cool.
So it's got the Minecraft-esque kind of
it literally is
replayability to it.
You're dealing with cubes in the game.
Mm-hmm.
So it has that. And you can really early on kind of redesign your whole landscape if you wanted to, which is pretty cool. A lot of games I feel like you kind of have to beat the game. Like Animal Crossing is that way, where I think you kind of have to do what it tells you to do to really start getting creative with it. This game kind of just gives you like the tutorial, and then you can be as creative as you want and not even really care about the story if you felt like it.
Sure. I let's see. I've never played an Animal Crossing game, and I have played Minecraft, but very little. Like never really got into it. Didn't have the friends to play it or whatever. So I don't know if I'd like this game. I really like Pokemon.
Yeah, this game's doesn't have battles. It's not violent in any regard.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely ready for like all ages.
Kind of like a cozy.
Cozy
game.
is the way to describe it for sure.
Yeah. Okay. I haven't gotten a Switch 2. I'm kind of happy with my Switch, and I just don't. There was nothing super appealing to me. This isn't going to make me buy it like right now, but maybe in the future it'll be
I think
reason for me to get it.
Yeah, I mean now this is the first game that's actually exclusive to Switch 2?
I think, or maybe not. Maybe Legends Arceus wasn't either.
Legends Z3 wasn't, I don't think.
Okay. Yeah, so like this and like, I don't know, the Donkey Kong game or whatever.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Is exclusive.
Gotcha. I didn't realize. Yeah, I mean the Donkey Kong game was the only game when I got my Switch 2, basically.
Sure.
But I did really like that game.
Yeah. So there's a couple games now. Yeah, it's just so funny because my ex is just flooded with it. People are so positive, and Pokemon I think people have been kind of disappointed with the last couple of mainline games.
Yeah,
they've seen kind of rushed and whatnot, and just general malaise about Nintendo as a big corporation and all that. So it's cool to have a really really fun game of
yeah, and I mean certainly if you're someone that genre doesn't interest you, then like don't play the game. But I think it's like the best of its kind in that genre. That it might be the literal best ever. It's pretty great that they kind of stole things from a lot of existing games, but just took all the best parts of those games. So that's nice to see. If you're gonna bother doing something that looks like it's just a mishmash of many things that already exist, at least they did it right.
Well, it's funny. I've liked almost every spin-off Pokemon game. Like anytime they've contracted out a different studio to make a Pokemon game that's slightly different than the mainline game, I feel like it's always pretty good.
Yeah.
So almost better than the main lines at this
point,
because those are so formulaic.
On that topic, I've heard about how Game Freak just has games that aren't Pokemon, and they have like amazing. They have voice actors and great graphics and just all these things that you're like, why aren't these in just the mainstream Pokemon games? And it's because they don't need to put their money into those things, and they still are just billion-dollar games.
They break records every year with their bad games.
Just
formulaic,
just for
games.
formulaic Pokemon games. It's totally fine.